Melbourne is often introduced as Australia's second-largest city, but that label barely captures what it is. It is the capital of Victoria, a vast urban region wrapped around the northern and eastern edges of Port Phillip Bay, and home to more than 5.4 million people as of June 2025. That means roughly 1 in 5 Australians lives in the Melbourne area. It is also the southernmost city in the world with a population above 1 million, giving it a distinctive position both geographically and culturally. When people say Melbourne, they might mean the central municipality led from the city's core, or the much larger metropolitan area made up of 31 local government areas. In everyday life, Melbourne is not just a dot on a map. It is a network of suburbs, rail lines, tram routes, beaches, sports grounds, laneways, universities, ports, galleries, and neighborhoods shaped by many waves of history. Long before Melbourne had skyscrapers, stations, or street grids, the land was home to Aboriginal Victorians for more than 40,000 years. The area now called Melbourne lies within the country of peoples of the Kulin Nation. Among the traditional custodians connected to this land are the Boomtown, Wurrung, and Wurundjeri peoples. Their relationship with the region was not simply one of residence, but of law, language, ceremony, seasonal knowledge, and responsibility to country. Rivers, wetlands, grasslands, and the bay provided food and movement routes, while places that later became urban landmarks were part of living cultural landscapes. Any history of Melbourne that begins with European settlement starts far too late. The modern city sits on land with deep human continuity, and that fact reframes every later chapter, from colonial expansion to today's efforts to recognize First Peoples and their enduring connection to place. The first British attempt to establish a settlement around Port Phillip came in 1803, when a short-lived penal settlement was set up while the region was still part of the colony of New South Wales. It did not last, but it foreshadowed the colonial interest that would return 3 decades later. Melbourne itself was founded in 1835, not as a penal colony, but with the arrival of free settlers from Van Diemen's Land, today's Tasmania. This detail matters because it shaped the city's early self-image. Unlike some Australian settlements that grew directly from convict administration, Melbourne developed quickly around land speculation, pastoral expansion, commerce, and the ambitions of settlers looking for opportunity. In 1837, it was incorporated as a Crown settlement and named after William Lamb, the second Viscount Melbourne, who was then Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. A young colonial town had acquired an imperial name. Melbourne's rise accelerated with remarkable speed. Queen Victoria declared it a city in 1847, and in 1851 it became the capital of the newly separated colony of Victoria. That same year, gold discoveries in Victoria transformed Melbourne's destiny. The Victorian gold rush drew people from around the world, bringing labor, capital, migration, and sudden wealth. Melbourne became the gateway to the goldfields and the commercial center where fortunes were banked, spent, invested, and displayed. During the 1850s and beyond, the city entered a long boom period. By the late 1880s, it had become one of the largest and wealthiest metropolises in Australia and, by some measures, one of the most prosperous cities in the world. Grand public buildings, wide boulevards, banks, theaters, arcades, and civic institutions reflected a confidence that the city's future was not provincial but global. The legacy of that boom is still visible in Melbourne's architecture. The city is known for an eclectic built environment where Victorian-era structures sit beside modern towers and dense contemporary skylines. One of its most important historic buildings is the Royal Exhibition Building, now World Heritage listed. It stands as a reminder of the 19th century era when international exhibitions were used to announce a city's sophistication, industry, and cultural ambition. Melbourne's central business district was laid out with a formal grid, but some of its most famous character comes from the smaller laneways that cut through that order. These spaces evolved from service passages into sites of cafes, street art, bars, and small-scale urban life. The result is a city that often feels layered, ceremonial facades and glass towers on one block, murals and hidden doorways on the next. After Australian Federation in 1901, Melbourne gained a national role. The new Commonwealth of Australia needed a seat of government, but Canberra had not yet been built as the permanent capital. So Melbourne served as the interim national capital until 1927. For more than 2 decades, federal political life operated from Melbourne, giving the city a central place in the early story of modern Australia. This role added to an already powerful mix of finance, law, culture, and administration. Even after Canberra became the official capital, Melbourne remained a major centre of influence. Its institutions, newspapers, universities, courts, and commercial networks helped shape national debates. The city's political chapter is sometimes overshadowed by Sydney's harbour identity or Canberra's planned capital symbolism, but Melbourne was where the young federation conducted much of its earliest practical business. Today, Melbourne is one of the most culturally diverse cities in the world, with the 7th largest foreign-born population. This diversity is not an abstract statistic, it is visible in food, language, festivals, faith communities, neighbourhoods, and everyday street life. Waves of migration after the Second World War, followed by later arrivals from Asia, the Middle East, Africa, Europe, and the Americas, helped remake the city. Melbourne's identity became less about a single colonial inheritance and more about overlapping communities. Its restaurant culture, markets, music scenes, and suburban centers reflect these global connections. Diversity also affects how the city imagines itself, cosmopolitan, outward-looking, and shaped by migration. The result is a metropolis where local identity is constantly being renewed, not by replacing the past, but by adding new layers of memory, labor, creativity, and belonging. Melbourne's cultural reputation is one of its strongest global brands. The city gave rise to Australian rules football, a sport that remains deeply tied to local identity and weekly ritual. It also played a major role in Australian Impressionism, Australian cinema, live music, theatre, and street art. The National Gallery of Victoria anchors its visual arts scene, while smaller galleries, independent venues, and theatres give the city a constant flow of creative production. Melbourne's famous laneway art is not just decoration for tourists, it reflects decades of street culture, youth expression, and debates over public space. Its live music culture has helped create an image of Melbourne as a city experienced at night as much as by day. Culture here is not confined to monumental institutions. It spills into pubs, walls, stages, alleys, and local communities. Sport is another way Melbourne understands itself. The Melbourne Cricket Ground, known simply as the MCG, is one of the city's defining landmarks and a symbolic home of Australian sport. Melbourne hosts major annual events including the Australian Open, one of tennis's 4 Grand Slam tournaments, and the Australian Grand Prix. In 1956, it hosted the Summer Olympics, becoming the first city in the Southern Hemisphere to do so. These events are not only spectacles, they reinforce Melbourne's role as an event city with the infrastructure, crowds, and civic culture to support global attention. Australian rules football adds a more local rhythm, filling stadiums and neighbourhood conversations through the season. In Melbourne, sport is not separate from culture. It is a form of theatre, tribal identity, public gathering, and international branding all at once. Melbourne is also a major economic centre. It is recognised as a leading financial hub in the Asia-Pacific region and ranked 28th globally in the 2024 Global Financial Centres Index. Finance, education, professional services, logistics, creative industries, and technology all contribute to the metropolitan economy. Its global connections are supported by major infrastructure. Melbourne Airport is the second busiest airport in Australia, linking the city to domestic and international networks. The Port of Melbourne is the nation's busiest seaport, moving goods that connect Victoria to national and global supply chains. These systems are less visible than galleries or stadiums, but they are essential to how the city functions. Melbourne's prosperity is built not only on lifestyle and culture, but on the movement of people, capital, freight, ideas, and services through a large metropolitan machine. Getting around Melbourne reveals another major part of its identity. The city has the largest urban tram network in the world, a fact that gives many central and inner suburbs their distinctive rhythm. Trams make Melbourne feel different from other Australian cities, connecting streets, shops, universities, offices, and homes with a visible form of public transport. The main metropolitan rail terminus is Flinders Street Station, an instantly recognizable landmark at the edge of the central business district. Southern Cross Station serves as the main regional rail and road coach terminus, linking Melbourne to wider Victoria and beyond. The city also has Australia's most extensive freeway network, reflecting decades of suburban growth and car-based commuting. Melbourne's transport story is therefore a mix of old and new, public and private, dense inner mobility and sprawling metropolitan reach. For much of the 2010s, Melbourne ranked as the world's most livable city on The Economist's measure, and it was voted the world's best city by Time Out in 2026. These rankings point to real strengths: healthcare, education, culture, stability, food, public life, and access to events and services. But they also invite a deeper question: livable for whom? A city of more than 5 million people faces pressures around housing affordability, transport congestion, climate resilience, and equitable access to opportunity. Melbourne's appeal comes from its layers: ancient Aboriginal country, colonial history, gold rush wealth, sporting ritual, migration, creativity, and metropolitan infrastructure. It is both polished and unfinished, celebrated and contested. That is what makes Melbourne more than a livability ranking. It is a city constantly negotiating between memory and growth, local character and global ambition. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.